Hey everyone, welcome to Sociastrology. Today we're going to take a look at the Mercury retrograde that is taking place during this Pisces season. So we will look at the dates here and some of the specifics, and then we will look at this collectively and from a perspective of how to generally approach it, and then at the expectations collectively and globally from the different aspects that this Mercury retrograde is going to make. And then we'll look at it sign by sign and consider it from a whole sign perspective based on your rising sign or your sun sign. So I'm going to get into some of the technical aspects of this retrograde. If you want to skip that, feel free. But we had Mercury enter Pisces on the 6th of February. And this retrograde is dragging out the process of Mercury spending its time in Pisces this time around. And Pisces is the place that Mercury least likes to be. It's least comfortable in Pisces. The reason for that is that it is opposite to the sign that it rules, Virgo, as well as the sign that it exalts in Virgo. So we'll get into how that's likely to play into all of this. But we had the shadow of the retrograde begin at 8 degrees and 29 minutes on the 11th of February. So we were already very much in the mix of what we're likely to need to redo or reconsider or rethink over the coming month. And I'm going to point out aspects of the shadow in this gray color if there's any confusion as to some of the dates of the aspects that it makes, specifically those to the North Node and to Jupiter. Those are going to have dates in white and gray. The ones in gray are where Mercury is going forward across it. The ones in white are when it's going retrograde across it, and then the ones in gray after that are going to be when it goes forward across those aspects as well. So we've had some of these aspects playing out. On the 26th of February is when Mercury officially goes retrograde, or it turns retrograde. It will then rule this eclipse that I'm showing here and that I just did a video about, this lunar eclipse in Virgo. Mercury, as I mentioned, is the domicile ruler of Virgo. So it's ruling that eclipse, and it is in this very awkward position here. So we're going to look at that as well. The midpoint of this retrograde, the Mercury cazimi, when the exact conjunction between the Sun and Mercury takes place, is on the 7th of March. Things should start to speed up from there. Mercury will then station direct on the 20th of March. It will clear the shadow, so it will clear the area of the sky that it went retrograde over by the 9th of April. And then finally, we end the Mercury in Pisces period of time on the 15th of April. Additionally, I want to point out something that I'm going to come back around to when we talk about the conjunction to Mars. But as that Mercury enters Aries, there's a bigger thing, there's a bigger picture that's unfolding here, where it will conjoin Mars again. And when it does so, it's also going to be conjoining Saturn. Now, we're going to get way deep into that in April. I'll do a whole video about that, but we will be going a little bit beyond even this Mercury in Pisces here, because the way that this retrograde is playing out is definitely setting up that very conspicuous triple conjunction in April. So let's talk about this Mercury retrograde generally. As I mentioned, it is very debilitated in Pisces. Typically, what Mercury does is it creates a sense of exchange. It organizes things. It puts things in their right spot, and it creates bridges between those things. So that's Mercury's job. But it doesn't have any of the tools or even any sort of respect from Pisces about doing those kinds of things. It's just not the environment in which to organize or to compartmentalize, even to externally communicate. So in Pisces, this Mercury winds up becoming much more withdrawn. It internalizes thoughts and feelings before sharing them, and this can cause them to become somewhat muddled in the process. This winds up creating a sense of emotional thinking, again, a huge amount of introspection, introversion, whereas Mercury is typically quite extroverted. And rather than dealing with notions of evidence or proofs, what Mercury in Pisces has to do is absorb information and knowledge intuitively in ways that are impossible, really, to evidence, but require then a sense of faith and belief in ideas. And that also then makes the sharing element of Mercury more complicated because it's very difficult to share information if you can't even really articulate what it is, but it's more of a sentiment, a feeling of something that you know deep in your bones, and you can't exactly explain why. Additionally, when it comes to the organizational element of Mercury, which it's really good at sorting things out, deciding on things, Pisces also complicates that because of the fact that it's going to see the merit of all options. It's not going to want to leave any one or any option or anything or any consideration out of the picture. It also doesn't want to get locked in. So it very much resists making decisions in and of itself, especially any decision that can't be then walked back from, which of course is going to be a major factor here with this retrograde that we're dealing with, is definitely not wanting to get locked in and backtracking. So this is going to be a time of very strong introspection, especially around notions of belief based on the configurations that are going on here, with some of those beliefs faltering, some of them being reinforced throughout this retrograde process. Now, we will also get all of the typical Mercury retrograde issues during this time, but perhaps especially amplified because of the fact that this is a very debilitated Mercury as well, and that it's ruling an eclipse during this period of time. So tech issues, miscommunications, misspeaking, editing issues, delays, confusion, brain fog, etc. All of these things that typically go along with Mercury retrograde, perhaps even especially the sentimental or the emotional aspects of sometimes we have a tendency to reach out to people from the past. This is more likely to be done on an emotional or sentimental basis this time, rather so much than a rational or a logical basis. We can also absolutely have bias issues here where we're mixing up facts and feelings. I do think that there's also going to be a fascinating thing taking place in the middle-ish of this retrograde where we have it ruling the eclipse on the 3rd, and then we have this Mercury going cazimi on the 7th, where information that is trying to be swept under the rug or covered up is somehow, even through that process, perhaps thrust out into the open. But this is going to be emphasizing matters of intuition, maybe even discussion around these considerations, like collective memory, spirituality, spiritual beliefs, media narratives, and how those are created, mass delusions that are created by the media as well, boundaries and where we should be sourcing our information, who we should and shouldn't be connected to. Throughout this retrograde process, it's going to be a bit wonky. It's going to feel a bit off. So the perception is going to be very non-linear. We may have incomplete or symbolic, almost like archetypal insights onto things where, again, we can't explain why we know these things. They may even appear somewhat distorted, where we know that certain aspects of what we're seeing are a bit off, but we can't put our finger on what. But I do think that through this process, we're getting this really deep revelation. There's also these weird undercurrents to this Mercury retrograde as it is conjoining the North Node 3 times through this process. It's also covering ground that has been cleared out by the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which just completed, it just perfected in Aries now, but it did just come through Pisces for the past couple of years. So it's not just that there's a slowdown here. It's not just that there are miscommunications or misunderstandings. It's much more about correction, karmic reckoning, disclosure, emotional truth that we're tapping into. So on a personal level, we are likely to have our minds much more sensitive, and we should be as flexible as we can be around our beliefs, our ideas, our decisions. Try to leave those decisions until a bit later in this process, at least after the eclipse and after the cazimi, at least after the first week of March. If you can, I would kick the can down the road on any sort of decision making. Additionally, with the moving on of Saturn and Neptune from this area, the reconsidering aspect of this is also likely to be much deeper and much more structural of what's a priority, what are we building out for ourselves, What is it that we've gotten caught up on in the past couple of years? Are there any deep disappointments about beliefs that we had or ideas of how things are going to play out that we have had that turned out maybe even to be illusions? But this is giving us an opportunity to look at that from different angles so that maybe we can derive some extra meaning out of why we needed to be disillusioned in that way. Or maybe better said, why we needed to be illusioned in that way in the first place, and what the lessons that we're able to take from that are. So the reconsiderations, the redoing, the complications, the revisiting, etc., this is going a bit deeper into the past. The discussions are going to be much deeper into the past as well. We may find ourselves changing our minds when it comes to foundational ideas that we have. And we may not know quite why we think what we do or why we know what we are coming into knowing during this period of time. But again, these threads of confusion, they have a huge amount of information, useful information in them. So if we can sit in not knowing all of the contours and the complete structure of everything that we're thinking about during this period of time, we should be able to get some really deep insights through this time about specifically what it is that we believe and what we will believe going forward. And it just makes so much sense for this retrograde to come through. It may feel a little bit annoying, but it makes so much sense for this retrograde to come through and rethink this area that Saturn and Neptune has just moved on from, because we still need to process all of that. We don't fully understand yet what the meaning or the outcome is of all of these narrative shifts that we're dealing with collectively and personally. We don't fully know all of the meaning behind the hidden truths, the illusions. This can still be tapped for a lot of information and insight that we can take with us forward in order to create a more sound cycle going forward or for decades to come with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So we will be thinking deeply about the past. Conversations with people from the deep past may even wind up coming up. But there is a lot of potential here as well with all of the configurations that this is making, the trines, the 3 trines to Jupiter, the 3 conjunctions to the North Node. There's a huge amount of potential for fantastically outside the box expression, creative, poetic, a sense of deep inspiration and deep understanding and deep knowledge, even a deep sense of connection to the collective consciousness during this period of time that is developing in multiple layers. So with that said, let's go ahead and look at all of these aspects in turn. We will get 1 conjunction to Venus, which is just after Mercury goes retrograde on the 26th. On the 28th, it will conjoin Venus straight away. This is quite helpful, and it should help to offset or make up for some of the confusion or the miscommunications. There should be a lot of patience on the front end of this, which is great, because on the back end of this retrograde, there is fundamentally an intense impatience with the process. But on the front end, we should be quite understanding of where there's the brain fog, where there is those little ditzy moments that we're going to have here, the miscommunications, the unsent messages, and things like that. What it is as well that we're focused on the front end of this is reevaluating our sense of values, our relationships and alliances, any sort of financial agreements that we have as well. And on a collective level, this can take the shape of cultural or creative or spiritual, like collective humanitarian ideals even. Like, what is it that we stand for? What is it that we believe in? And what do we believe about human connection and the value of humanity? So there's this much increased sensitivity throughout this period of time where it's going to infuse our communication and our understanding of our connections, hopefully then also increasing our flexibility and understanding too, along all of those lines. It's very likely that specifically old relationship dynamics will wind up resurfacing during this time, either for healing and reconnection or for a sense of closure. And we can definitely expect for financial markets to be much more emotional and sentimental rather than logical during this time as well. On a global political level, Venus usually winds up bringing in themes of alliances, treaties, especially when it's connected with Mercury. This can be trade as well, currency considerations, diplomacy. All of that is very Venusian, especially when it's combined with Mercury. So we can expect reassessments along all of those lines. Our alliances, any treaties that have been signed, any agreements that have been signed between nations, negotiations going on behind closed doors. They should look like they might be going well during this period of time. I'm not the most sure that that's going to stick with us since this Mercury is backing up to Mars, but at least in this moment, there should be a little bit of grace within those conversations. We're also likely then to revisit some currency or trade discussions as well. Now, one thing as well during this period of time is that we may fall under a sense of bias when it comes to charms or charming people. So being able to kind of spin a story in a way that sounds really great and looks great and is quite appealing, but it still might not be true. So that is something to watch out for a bit here. The extent to which we want to believe someone. Now, on the 3rd of March, then we're getting this Virgo lunar eclipse. Like I said, I did a deeper dive into this in the previous video, which I will link to. But just to recap, especially in this first week of March, there's these major themes of truth versus illusion, facts versus narrative, potential for culmination or revelation along those lines as well. So heightened issues around misinformation and intentionally misinforming people or giving bad information or bad data, trying to avoid accountability or create a sense of a cover-up of information, but also then consequences for this with the eclipse. So this eclipse itself is calling for discernment, accountability, data, information, clarity, organization, infrastructure, and that is all precisely what is weakened during this moment. Now, as we get a little bit deeper into the week and we build up to the conjunction of Mercury and the Sun, which is on the other side of this eclipse, we may see some of that break through where there's an attempt or a weakened response along all of these lines that winds up coming to light. So we could see intelligence leaks, exposure of misinformation campaigns, there's also attempts at creating order under this eclipse, but with this lack of clarity around why or around the values behind this. There's very confused decision-making, very poor judgment, very bad decision-making under this eclipse as well. Until we get to that cazimi, then some things wind up breaking through. We're also likely to see a lot of procrastination or even disengagement, slowing down any sort of effective action during this time. Messaging and propaganda is going to be shaped by bad data, by censorship, by cover-ups, and public statements that are marked or marred by backtracking or confrontation with the facts within the context of a broader struggle, a collective struggle to believe what we're hearing during this time. On a collective energetic level, we are likely to see some emotional overwhelm of any sort of practical necessity or practical decision making. So better if we can to try to push those decisions off. We're also likely to have a lot of people around us addressing health considerations or concerns. There may be some environmental issues even that wind up coming up here. Dealing with working systems and trying to organize them, but struggling with that a bit. We can see institutional data breakdown. So when it comes to our own data systems, running into issues with that. So our own work, our own correspondences, communications, emails, texts, etc. We may even see a compromise of data during this period of time. This is also a very spiritually oriented, idealistic phase of this retrograde, which is really testing our beliefs, our values, our emphasis on care, our dedication or devotion to service or inner growth. As I mentioned in the video about the eclipse, approaching this from a sense of humility, I think is going to absolutely be the best way to handle this. Slowing down, chilling out, being as humble as we possibly can during this period of time is going to avoid a lot of the fallout that can be created here. So slowing down to process, reorder, rethink, and just move through and flow through some of the confusion here. We're also likely to find that there's a lot of introversion or people pulling back. A lot of people in a very reflective state, maybe in their own intuition, their own imagination. So I would really recommend not taking it personally if people are kind of ghosting during the eclipse period of time. So here we have on the 9th of March, the trine to Jupiter. What's interesting about this is that Jupiter is actually stationing during this trine as well. So you can see that they are trine to each other at 15 degrees and 5 minutes, and Jupiter is actually stopping there. Additionally, this Jupiter in Cancer, it's exalted, so it's in a wonderful space. It is very belief-oriented, very security-oriented. It is comfort-seeking and comfort-providing. But this Jupiter is also ruling all of these Pisces placements, with Jupiter being the traditional ruler of Pisces. So this Mercury retrograde is ruled by this Jupiter, which is stationing itself during this trine. Additionally, we have this bigger story playing out February, March, and April with this trine as well. So this is going to be very magnified on the Jupiter side, which already tends to magnify things. So expect really big picture realizations, especially around philosophical or religious or legal themes, a strong collective reconsideration of belief systems, as well as a sense of karmic or cosmic correction during this time. This should be positive, and there should be some positive developments of agreements or plans, conversations, or connections. So feeling like we're able to get on the same page with people when it comes to our plans, when it comes to how we're going to get along and work together. There's also an optimistic quality to this trine that should help us through some of the fog, or feeling a sense of confidence that we will wind up coming to positive conclusions on the other side of this retrograde. There's this encouragement that comes from a trine with Jupiter. So even though things may be really, really slow right around this period of time, I think that this is one of those moments where we're able to relax into the strong go with the flow aspect of this retrograde and just lean into good vibes rather than trying to force specific outcomes at the time that we're wanting them. Now, on a global or political level, this is a huge turning point when it comes to narratives. Leaders may be issuing these reassuring statements. Governments may wind up reframing their policies through moral or cultural or humanitarian language. We may see some laws along all of those lines as well. Legislation with Mercury there, bills written up and passed. We could also see religious or ideological leaders re-entering or taking up a lot of space within the political discourse as well. I will say that the propaganda or the messaging campaigns here are likely to be more emotionally appealing and emotionally persuasive. So that is something to try to watch out for a bit, that we may get hooked by our emotions into believing things that aren't entirely true, but are rather these kind of feel-good stories about who we are and what we belong to. This also represents a moral or ideological recalibration. So there may even be some like whistleblower developments, like good or helpful or considerate information that is coming out and that's framed as a kind of moral correction or seeking a moral correction as well. Additionally, I am a bit concerned about the messaging here because of how soft it is, but it could be the significant shift in the tone globally before we get more decisive actions unfolding later in March, and then especially in like mid to late April. So we may see some diplomatic breakthroughs or like strategic moves, strategic diplomacy, conversations that seem to be going okay. We may feel like we're kind of getting pulled back from the brink here, and there may be some really inflated expectations in this moment, but we still do have an interesting alignment that I'm going to talk about a little bit later when we talk about Mars that's on the other side of this. Now, this Jupiter in Cancer, especially as it's retrograding and reinforcing a lot of the themes that it is carrying, it has a lot to do with notions of patriotism, in-grouping, out-grouping, who belongs, who doesn't belong, protection, national security, etc. and the laws around that and the moral frameworks through which that is argued, right? So immigration is a big theme here. We may see revisions globally around asylum frameworks or refugees, immigration generally speaking. We may see some recalibration around border enforcement strategies as well, or a lot of conversation, at least around this, around needing to rework this or create new plans to rethink that. And a lot of emphasis on, quote, like national protection narratives, especially that are appealing to emotion. Now, we can also see with this alignment with Jupiter, often legislation with Mercury, and then with Jupiter, like the constitutional either upholding or striking down of legislation. So appeals or reversals of either major rulings or bills during this period of time, revisions to constitutional or, again, immigration-related interpretations of the law, even international legal disputes could wind up shifting their tone. It'll look like there's negotiation here. Again, I'm a little bit skeptical about what we're seeing during this time, but we may see some international cooperation frameworks revised during this time, or treaties that have stalled, or diplomatic talks that have stalled, resuming, maybe even quietly, maybe even back channel diplomacy strengthening during this period of time. But there's this kind of broader reconsideration of legal or security or trade decisions on an international level as well. We may even see some reinterpretation of international law or court rulings along those lines. And that could be, during this period as this retrograde of Mercury is unfolding here, or perhaps as the wrap up of this story that's unfolding of these trines to Jupiter from this Mercury around the 3rd of April, when it makes the third and final trine after it turns direct. But again, bringing this back to the collective energetic level, this should feel pretty good. It should feel like there is a sense of emotional expansion that we're coming back into, a heightened focus on family, on a sense of belonging, on nostalgia, on instincts and intuition, on listening and understanding as well. But on the other side of this, we are working toward the conjunction with Mars. And this is where I start to see us getting quite impatient with this retrograde. So we can definitely expect impulsive speech, arguments, fights, especially verbal fights, emotional arguments. So people getting emotionally heated, hopefully not also potentially manipulative, but that could absolutely be the case. With both of these in an emotional and passive sign here, there could be arguments that are made on a basis of like guilt trips or other kinds of manipulations, or people trying to convince others to do things on their behalf through a sense of guilt tripping or manipulation. Totally misinformation is going to play into this. This is just straight up bad info. Lies, quite literally. A deep sense of frustration as well with our own minds or with our own confusion. We may be tempted here to just make a decision just for the sake of it if we've been trying to hold out on that. So try not to be too overly rash in your decision making here, because as a moment in time, this indicates bad decisions being made. So we may not want to rush that around March 15th. We're likely to get it very wrong. Beware the Ides of March when it comes to any sort of locking yourself into a decision. Also, unfortunately, we may see some accidents involving water or chemicals, or like on the seas or in the water, miscommunications or threats on the water as well. So on a global level, we can expect a lot of really increased rhetoric, threats, big time, tensions with militaries or especially naval tensions building up here. There could even be like intelligence or like cyber issues, conflicts, disputes, breaking into systems as well, with Pisces kind of working behind the scenes and flowing through boundaries and barriers. So covert operations, I think, are going to be really big here. Indirect conflict, strategic conflict, trying to set your enemies against each other kind of thing going on. We may even have some public protests that are fueled by misinformation or misinformation around protests. Hopefully there are not, again, like when it comes to public protests that are fueled by misinformation. Sometimes intelligence agencies will spur on protests in different countries as well. That may be something that we wind up seeing here. The thing with Mars and Pisces is that if it's going to act roughly, which I think we can expect for it to do on some levels when it is conjoined to a retrograde Mercury and the North Node, it does so passively and covertly. So the actions here are likely to be very just indirect, covert, strategic, under the surface, hidden, secretive, even mysterious. So this one's going to be a bit complicated. Now, if you are a creative type, you can totally use this to act upon your imagination. Mercury and Mars together, it does sharpen the thinking a little bit, but I think it's still just in such a weakened state that we shouldn't necessarily rely upon that in any meaningful way during this time. If you want to write a strong argument, go for it. I wouldn't the most recommend publishing it right now. I would give it another proofread a little later on. We're also likely to have just such deep convictions here. We do still pretty much have a trine between these placements and Jupiter, which is also reinforcing that. Plus that Mars is actively like applying to that Jupiter as well. So emotional, like conviction-based statements out in public, really making a splash here too. Now, with all of that said, I want to talk just quickly here about what's been going on with Mercury and Mars over the past several months and into another month or so from here. So because of the way that Mars going direct through all of these signs after its retrograde in Cancer last year, because of its alignment with Mercury, instead of getting the typical 3 conjunctions that we usually will get between Mercury and Mars, or even just 1, in this series, in this phase, we have gotten 5, or we're getting 5 rather. So we had a conjunction of Mercury to Mars in Scorpio. If you recall, we discussed that last year. That was on the 20th of October of 2025. With Mercury having crossed over Mars in Scorpio, then as Mercury turned retrograde in Sagittarius, it wound up crossing back over Mars. It went into Scorpio, the last retrograde of Mercury that we had, and then it started moving forward and wound up catching up with Mars on the 18th of January of 2026 in Capricorn, in very late Capricorn. That was the last conjunction that we had. Mercury went way out ahead, turned retrograde, and now this is the 4th of the 5 conjunctions that are taking place between these two. And what this is actually setting us up for, and this is something I've been eyeing for quite some time here, is that all of this retrograde stuff, Mercury has timed itself to such a degree of precision that it will conjoin Mars for the 5th and final time when it is simultaneously conjoined to Saturn. And this is going to be on the 20th of April of 2026, and it's rough. That's not going to be a great day. Like I said, I'm going to do a whole video about this, but all of what's been going on here is playing into weird covert actions and threats, things going on behind the scenes, manipulations, misinformation, etc., that's been playing out for quite some time. We're probably still not fully aware of it. That's going to culminate in some kind of, I think, kinetic or overt action or revelation or accountability or karmic reckoning or something that's kicking off big time around the 20th of April that is coming out of all of this. So a lot of us have been being manipulated. We probably don't fully know where all of this is coming from or where all of this is headed, but it's playing into a broader story that started in earnest last October and will come to some resolution in April here. Additionally, what's interesting about the way that this is unfolded is that it's been highlighting the Mars and Jupiter signs. We got a conjunction in Scorpio. We're going to get one in Aries. So this may have something to do with war, certainly, because it is starting and stopping in these Mars-ruled signs. A lot of this has been taking place with retrogrades, specifically in the Jupiter-ruled signs. So there's something about a big picture or a narrative or a belief that is not clear. These are the signs in which Mercury is debilitated, and it has in retrograde in the signs it's debilitated in that have to do with belief, has crossed that Mars backward. That's not great. That's very bad for information and knowledge and understanding. We dodged a conjunction in the only air sign that's in the mix here. So that's not so great for logic and rationality at all, or reasonable actions. But we did get one Saturn-ruled conjunction in Capricorn in the sign of governments and big global institutions of Capricorn. So there's something going on here for sure. Interpret that kind of how you will. I think that we will get a bit more clarity as we're going into April as to what this has been about, and hopefully about some of the misinformation and manipulation that's been behind this on a global level, before that final conjunction. But there's something interesting and weird kind of playing out here. On a personal level, when it comes to what action we are capable of taking in our own lives and what agency and autonomy we have in our own lives, I think that that's some of the broader story that we have here. But it fascinates me foremost on a global level as to what that's been pointing to. Now, without a doubt, just as significant as any of these alignments here, we have been getting 3 conjunctions of this Mercury in Pisces to the North Node. So it very early on crossed that North Node on the 12th of February when it was going direct through this area. It is retrograde crossing that North Node again on the 17th of March, and it's stationing direct right next to it on the 20th of March, and then it will cross that North Node again on the 23rd of March. The North Node, the nodal axis it plays in with the South Node is always on the other side. This is the eclipse point. It can be rather obscuring at times, so certain things are unclear, but it is extraordinarily consequential, and it can bring the impact of matters way, way, way up in significance, especially like historical significance. This is often related to the seeds that we have sown, so it can feel quite karmic or destined as well, and speaks to the evolution of matters. What is significant? What is important? What is raised up? And what is brushed aside? What is serving? What's not serving? What is going on in the future? What are we reaching for? And what are we letting go? Where have we come from? So there can be this weird time warp kind of feeling that we get with the nodal axis, where the past seems to come into the present, and the present has a huge impact on the future, etc. So we're always sowing seeds that are important. We want to be careful about our actions when there are conjunctions to the nodal axis, but we're also likely to see the consequences, be they good or bad, from our past actions with these conjunctions as well. So a lot of this, again, is going to have to do with conversations, connections, exchange, ideas that we've had, beliefs that we've had. So a big theme here of karmic conversations, feeling like we are at a crossroads, a destined crossroads here around decisions that we need to make. We may be making very significant decisions in this moment, especially those that we've been putting off through the process. Our conversations during this time are likely to feel very faded or of greater impact on us and on others. We're likely to see on a collective energetic level these mass shifts in our perception or the collective consciousness. Some of us may perceive of this as a collective mass awakening around deception as well. That is certainly what I am hoping for, especially in that like the 17th through the 23rd period of time, where we're then getting that Mercury stationing and then going direct finally over that North Node as well. We may even see some statements that seem prophetic, or some statements that have been made in the past that now seem prophetic or visionary. Narratives as well that seem quite visionary may gain traction. Prophets, either like false or true, and prophecies, like people making these big statements about what's going to play out, is going to be super appealing. Not all of it's going to be true, though. That's not what the nodal axis says. It's not always dealing in truth. It's just dealing in fate. Sometimes we are fated to believe things that are wrong. So that is something to keep in mind. It may feel like intuition around this time. Less clear that it actually is that, but a lot of us are meant to believe big narratives during this time, be they true or not. Now, on a global political level, expecting historic announcements during this time, major policy redirections or redactions or narratives around policy, like an argument being made for specific big policies, collective turning points in diplomacy, in trade during this time as well, especially anything that has to do with like maritime routes or things like this. I'm certainly expecting ideological realignments on a mass level. I think I mentioned that. But again, this is a moment for significant information. So leaks, whistleblowers, and especially around matters of deception. So a big pivot here in terms of global consciousness playing out at the end of this Mercury retrograde. Very, very fascinating how this is all going to wind up wrapping up. So finally, this Mercury is going to be stationing direct on the 20th of March, again at 8 degrees and 29 minutes of Pisces. So we should feel at this point that some level of mental clarity begins to return, that some truths are revealed and begin to integrate with what we feel like we know. The processing may feel like it's able to actually make some progress and get some traction. There's this slow rebuilding of trust in our own ideas, our own decision making, the conversations that we have. We may see some delayed conversations or negotiations resuming during this time as well. If people have been quite withdrawn, we could see some alleviation of that here. Certainly much more when we get to April and Mercury winds up moving into Aries, where it'll be way more extroverted. But we can get some clarification, some corrections here. Finally, just to summarize, throughout this time, just expecting a lot of weird intelligence leaks or document disclosures, attempts at cover-ups that aren't going to work, shifts in policy around immigration, around national security, especially couched in patriotic or emotional appeals. I would expect some volatility in markets and trade based on emotion, based on feeling, based on sentiments. I think that like naval or maritime considerations are going to be even more of a geopolitical focus. That, of course, has been the case with Neptune moving into Aries, but with this retrograde, I think that reinforces a lot of the discussion around all of that too. We could also see some major scrutiny when it comes to healthcare or pharmaceuticals too, just based on the fact that Jupiter in Cancer is also switching direction during this period of time. So drugs may even be a consideration, like protection from drugs, etc. Religious or ideological tensions, I think, are going to rise and transform, shift during this time. And a lot of public demand for accountability, but our bureaucratic systems are going to be super weak during this time as well. So I will just say this is a weird kind of karmic clearing cycle with the way that this is aligning to the nodal axis and the fact that this is going back over an area where we just have had the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So asking ourselves, like, what narratives have we believed without verification, without knowing, without evidence, but based on our sentiments or our sense of belonging or our sense of identity being attached to certain narratives or beliefs? Where have the leaders that we've been following or disbelieving been relying on emotion over facts in their appeals as well? That's likely to really come up. And I also just want to reiterate that the quality of this time for us personally is going to hinge on whether we can go with the flow, number one, and two, exercise some level of humility and patience throughout this process. That's going to get us the best results. But especially toward the end of this, like the middle part of March into April, that's what's going to be lacking, is the humility in belief. The convictions are going to get really strong and the information is going to get poorer and poorer, except for the weird moments where we have these breakthroughs that wind up embarrassing a lot of people that are holding on to specific ideas and, reinforcing them and shouting them from the rooftops as we get to that conjunction with Mars. So some people are definitely going to be left with some egg on their face by the end of this because of the really bad information. the bad ideas, the poor decision-making abilities, etc. But we can absolutely avoid that through humility. With all of that said, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I hope that this was helpful. I hope it was clarifying. I hope I wasn't too confusing. I'm recording this pretty close to that Mercury retrograde, and it is hitting my chart very, very hard. So it's been very maddening to me. But I tried to organize my notes well, so I hope that that did help. And if you did enjoy this video and you don't mind giving it a like or hype, I would really, really greatly appreciate that. And do consider sticking around and subscribing for future videos. We tend to look through major alignments like this from a collective and a global and a personal level based on the sign-by-sign horoscopes. And those readings are going to be time-stamped. And just to clarify again, it should fit best for your rising sign, because then the horoscope will be speaking directly to this retrograde taking place in the whole sign house in which you have Pisces in your chart. But feel free to check out for your sun as well if you would like. There is information in the description box below about personal reading bookings, my latest course offerings, and membership perks, which includes all of the courses, but also then weekly forecasts and other perks like discounts, free readings, drawings. So definitely check that out if you are interested. And speaking of memberships, thank you so much to the members of this channel for your support. Thank you so much to Angel Niblock, JJ, Michelle Howell, Deborah Keel-Leavitt, Jody, Anne-Marie, C. Rezer, Peace Out, Aya, Rachel Windholtz, Lynn Newman, Long T Standing, The Nelson Cat Maya, Connie DiMartino, Deli Gizi, Mango JT, B Love, Startlingly True, Psyche Lloyd, Noah, Maria Cyril Hyro, Aquarian Antiquarian, Susan Martin, Chad W., Jonathan Mason, Adrian K., SP, Teresa Jones, Sherry Leas, Nioke Beam, Farts and Chuckles, Create, Gales Tarot and Astrology, Talitha McKenzie, K from NH, Pitar Music, Nancy Imhoff, Peta Carlin, Sarah MCap, Angela Lazaire, Travis Dandro, Jane Bevan, Helena Fisher, Tina Reynolds, Sacred Alpaca, Natasha P., Indy Loon, Linda Skull, Marnouche Amiri, D Fish, Ellen McCormick Martins, Black Sheep Pink Unicorn, Someone77, Attunement Tarot, Cookerzilla Joshua Owen, J.A., Carrie Affronti, Mike, Lynn Ching, Piska Kuznetsova, Linda Osborne, Denise Gould, Many Stars, E.F., Zoe, Plamena Malanova, The Muslim Researcher, Dante Hill, Cameron Walker, Larissa F., A. Neon, Marlo Murphy, Allison Arthurson, Janelle S., Janet McCann, Gamine, CPT Alpha 12, Alina Bloomgarden, Mina Dobras, NG, Rebecca Cortez, Ricky Dandridge, Nova Kane, Brandy Williams, Allison Elliott, Adya Freya Willow Raven, Psychics and Mediums, Mason HKW, M.A., Nat Catnip, Shane V., Jesse, Aaron Paterson, Sherry Hawkins, Amanda Emmons, This Is It, My Friend, Tracy Gordine, Sabrina Simon, J.L., Grounded Fire, Shadow and Soul, Revolution, Esther Swan, Victoria Gordon, Lizzie Willow, Emily Zoe, Scarlett Sparks, Patricia Cogley, Alex T., Kim Spina, Rachel Y., Ruby Payne, Valerie Hamilton, Gabrielle Pages, Sunshine, Cat Alien, Ann Patate, Rebecca Fusetti, Anna Jordan, Roxette De La Cruz, I Hate 1988, Patrick Ewing, Sylvia C., Jennifer Arena, Madcap Vlogs, Veronica Dubiel, Linda McCallum, Jenny Tron, B., Desiree Hamlin, Maria Paula Major, Self Carey, Katie Scarlett, Sandra Anderson, Marlena Kimber, Corvus Cornix, The Electric Cheese Productions, Giselle Christine, Sasha Stargarden, Danny Baneyful, Stacy Starkey, Christy Pops MC, Aw Cameron, Milana Rivera, Casey Rusma, Petra S., Kelly Zarsa, Peace Yarn and Paper, Lakshana, Mused Wellness, Holobiont, One of Many, Monique Bird, Pample Granite, Deb Wrights, Jean Desoude, Melissa Campbell, Charles Oganike, Susanna, Jenna Martindale, Big Steppa AD, Siobhan, Nick Stewart, WGG Photo, Zenki, Wana, Big Sky 25, I Am Just Me, RG, Maria Brandusa, Coleman, Lydia Wilcox, Follow the Moon and Grab the Stars, Candace Harris, Stephanie Saunders Suskind, Angela C., Andreas Alcayaga, Sherry Hadfield, Amanda, Rusina Velev, Belen Valadares, Alma Reinhold, Karen Charis, Amy Odom, Jana Chatton, Sophia M., Still Ripples Coaching, Claudio Yudi, Penny C., Coco, and Catherine Terra. Thank you all so much. Much love to you. And without any further ado, let's get into the sign by sign. All right, so for Aries, we have the Mercury retrograde in Pisces taking place in your 12th house. This is an interesting, a bit elusive house. Most elusive things do show up here. So things that are under the surface, that are in your subconscious, that are kind of outside of you, or that you feel like you have less overt control over. This is also a place where we can kind of isolate and withdraw from the social and just be alone. So our inner world and our internal thoughts, our patterned even behavior, the subconscious thoughts that wind up fueling that all shows up here. So it's a very interesting place, a little bit hard to define, but one thing I would expect to feel that you misunderstand with this Mercury retrograde here, some of the questions that come up being around motives, possibly even your own, like what is it that's really driving me toward these personal goals maybe that you have? Where is this thought pattern or this behavioral pattern? Where is that coming from? And possibly even some misunderstanding of other people's motives as well. You may be questioning that. You may be questioning what you're judging that upon. And I am hoping that there is some clarity. I would expect on the personal side that you should be developing greater clarity about your subconscious ideals, what is ultimately underlying your motivations during this period of time, what's going on in your subconscious, what's going on for you emotionally and psychologically. It might not always be the most comfortable just because of this Mercury retrograde, especially in Pisces, where it's a very debilitated Mercury. There's likely to be some mental fog that comes through where you just feel kind of disconnected from your thought process, or like it's almost not fully available to you all the time. Just clear thinking, right? And you may find that you are thinking more intuitively or more emotionally. So I would lean a bit more into what your intuition, what your gut is telling you about things rather than trying to reason your way through. Because again, of the fact that this Mercury is in such an interesting, unusual state in this very elusive aspect, even of your own person and your own inner world, right? So you may find that through this kind of mental processing and everything, that secrets, unresolved issues wind up resurfacing to be dealt with, to be clarified, to be brought out to the open, at least for you, to bring that into your conscious awareness. And you may find that there's some issue that's there. This Mercury, it's running, interestingly, from a conjunction to Venus, which is pretty optimistic, to a trine with Jupiter, which is pretty optimistic. But it winds up wrapping up this retrograde in a conjunction with Mars. And that could point to some complicated, like, root issue of a pattern, or of maybe things that you tend to sweep under the rug for the sake of wanting to avoid conflict, or, you know, wanting to look at the more complicated aspects of something. That could wind up resurfacing in a way that requires action with that conjunction to Mars. So if that happens, it's not a huge problem. It's actually really helpful. And I would just be really patient and understanding with yourself about that, because you're really getting at something if that's how that winds up playing out. I would also really recommend journaling, writing things down, meditation, quietude during this time, because you should get through that kind of Piscean process of just absorbing the energy around you and processing the energy that's flowing within you. You should be able to get the greatest amount of clarity through that. So just possibly even like channeling, automatic writing, things like this, just trying to let the energy come through, that's where you're likely to get the most unique and unusual clarity. And finally, just slowing down and resting. Those moments are probably going to be very frustrating where you feel like you can't think clearly. And if you can just be, like I said, super patient with yourself, consider withdrawing a bit more during this season, sitting with your thoughts, just doing things that you really enjoy that feed your soul, basically. Maybe even thinking through what feels genuinely really good internally without a need to justify that on the outside, without feeling the need to like necessarily be of service to other people. I think that that's going to be one of the better ways to work with this energy here. Because like I've said repeatedly, it's kind of elusive. It's a little bit, it'll probably be difficult even for you to put your finger on what exactly this has done, but you should get an internal sense of clarity from it by the end of this. I also have shown here the eclipse that is going to wind up playing into that Mercury retrograde as well. That's going to add a whole different layer to this, and I covered that in the most recent video. That eclipse is going to take place on March 3rd, and that'll also be important to consider within all of this. But yeah, I think that that is pretty much what I have for this Mercury retrograde, so I hope that it treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Taurus, the Mercury retrograde in Pisces is taking place in your 11th house. And this is the place of your hopes, dreams, aspirations, what you are aiming at in life, as well as your group affiliation. So friend groups, but also colleagues and any, groups that you belong to in life. This can also have a lot to do with social expectations, how you fit in. So there's likely to be some confusion or some delays here as you are working out a deeper sense of clarity along these lines. Now, it may feel like there's been some confusion or some disillusionment or some new plans that you've been trying to figure out over the past couple of years because Saturn and Neptune were just in this house sorting out the blueprints of how you're going to wind up moving forward and what you're actually enthusiastic about going forward and who you're enthusiastic about. But Mercury retrograde is giving you one last look at all of this to see where any of those fault lines are, to see where any confusion remains, so that you can get a much greater footing, a more sure footing before you move forward on those plans. So when it comes to friends or associates, there may be some confusion, there may be some miscommunications, some misunderstanding about plans that you have together. So group plans or events could wind up being delayed. They may need to be rethought out. They may need to be rescheduled. You may find that you need additional people or different skills and talents to be in the mix as well. This could even have anything to do with client work or marketing, any sort of pitches that you need to make. I would just expect for there to be a little bit of missteps when it comes to that and needing to come back to the drawing board a bit. You may also have some confusion around friends and associates, not just with each other, but in the sense of wondering who's on side or wondering who you really identify with or who you really belong with, where you belong, what role you really want to be filling. And this is all very aspirational as well. So keeping in mind, there's an open question of who do you want to associate with? Who makes you feel good? Who do you really like, right? Who do you really get along with? Who do you really feel like you belong with? Those questions are likely to be coming up again during this period of time, again, to give you some extra looks at this. I know that on the other side of that Saturn-Neptune conjunction there, that you've probably been pondering this a good bit for a couple of years now. But Mercury should be helping to clarify that in a much more like conscious mind kind of a way. So where some of the answers are clearer by the end of this retrograde process. Also, anything to do with networking, that's also going to wind up requiring patience. People may take longer to get back to you. You may even find that people seem to be ghosting or seem to be withdrawing. And I wouldn't take that super seriously. And I wouldn't take it personally either. It may just be that this retrograde is also pointing out that the people that you're connected with, which can be represented by the 11th house, are introverting quite a bit, especially when it comes to their communication. So they may even be overlooking some communication that they haven't been returning and kind of just falling behind on correspondence, etc. They may be a little bit confused. They may have thought they hit send, but they didn't, etc. So I would be as patient as you can with people and their communication during this period of time as well. And also with your own. You may even find it a little bit more difficult to like keep up with the emails and to want to connect with everyone all the time. Now, on the other hand, you may actually hear from some people from the past as well with this retrograde. So you may have old friends or old colleagues coming out of the woodwork, wanting to connect again or wanting to share some ideas, wanting to see if you're still on the same page or if you can come back to being on the same page. You may have some friend that's like visiting as well. And that can be quite enjoyable to connect with people from the past with this Mercury retrograde or to reminisce, to think about old friends. So I'd stay open to those kinds of connections coming through. But finally, also, this being the place of hopes, dreams, and aspirations. Like I said, and I'm going to say it again, Saturn and Neptune they're just now in Aries. They just moved out of this house. So you have been reevaluating your aspirations over the past couple of years on a very deep level. You may have felt somewhat disillusioned with some goals that you had and felt the need to step aside from some of them or leave some behind and start building out or idealizing a new way forward or idealizing new goals or new aspirations. Heck, you may have even accomplished all that you had set out to accomplish and therefore needed to be like, okay, now what? And this retrograde, just on the other side of Saturn and Neptune having left this house of yours, is giving you one last look over from many different angles. What are you aiming at now going forward? What's the plan? And how are you going to action that? How are you going to think that out? So if you can try to plan that out, journal it, maybe think it through. You're probably not going to have full clarity on that until, say, April or so. But if you are able to look at that from a bunch of different angles during this March, that should be super helpful as well for clarifying what you're aiming at long term. So other than all of that, we also do have this eclipse coming up. It's a lunar eclipse in Virgo that's going to be ruled by the Mercury retrograde in Pisces here. So that's going to play into this picture too. And I did just cover that in the most recent video. So if you're wanting to go in on this a little bit more, there is more information in there. But I think that's pretty much everything that I have for you, Taurus. So I do hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Gemini, we have the Mercury retrograde in Pisces taking place in your 10th house. This is the place of your public reputation, your status, your public role, basically. So if you have a traditional career, this is your career and your position within that. Otherwise, this is just what you are known for. So expect miscommunications and misunderstandings along these lines. Authority figures, so literally bosses, can also wind up showing up in the 10th house. So precisely with bosses and authority figures, expect miscommunications for sure. So you may want to try and clarify things to make sure that you are more on the same page than you otherwise might be. But even with those efforts, there's likely to just be a little bit of that they feel like they're not even clear on what they are wanting. If this also has anything to do with recognition or your position, like a promotion or responsibilities, duties, leadership positions, raises, etc., also expect miscommunications there. I wouldn't fret the most if you have a conversation that's up in the air throughout March about a raise. I know that that can be annoying, but it looks to me like it probably is going to work out pretty okay, because what we have is, I'll just lay this out here, the Mercury retrograde, it's going to start conjoined to Venus. It's going to go back, over the sun and the north node, etc. And it's going to trine this Jupiter, which is also retrograde in your second house. It's going to end up at that Mars, which might be a moment where you feel very impatient toward the end of March about a lack of clarity in these conversations about recognition and your value, your worth being adequately compensated. But then that Mercury, as it goes direct, it's going to be completing that trine to Jupiter, which at that point, hopefully this isn't confusing, but at that point, that Jupiter will also be direct. So this does wind up resolving in a better way, but it's going to be much later in the month. So try not to let that impatience in the middle of this process cause any sort of rifts that are unnecessary. So try to avoid any sort of arguments or conflicts within your working life, but especially with authority figures or about your roles. It would also be wise to be careful about what you're saying, especially publicly or within your career, on two different sides here. So try to avoid overpromising, which is very likely with that Mercury conjoining Venus and trining Jupiter. That's going to want to say yes to all sorts of things in the beginning here. And then as it gets to that Mars, like I said, that can be argumentative even and very impatient. So try to avoid going to any extremes when it comes to the statements that you're making in your public life, especially, or again, the promises that you're making. Also, worth keeping in mind that this does represent something of a slowed down period, especially early in March. So you may even want to really avoid taking too much on your plate during that period of time, even when it comes to your normal workload. Not only should you not be getting way out ahead of your skis and agreeing to all sorts of unusual stuff, but you may actually even want to pull back a bit on what you're usually capable of doing and then try to get a sense of clarity, because you will very likely even wind up finding yourself having to redo things throughout this time, or to re-communicate about things, or to renegotiate anyway. So clarifying before you act is one of the ways to try to avoid dealing with the complications, or the annoyance at least, just of having to redo what you've already done in this area of your life. So try to clarify, what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? What is the likelihood of this course of action that you're considering actually helping with that? Or could it maybe hinder that? Just take your time with your words, choose them carefully, your actions, what you're thinking about things, what you are perceiving of people's motivations and things like that. Just try to stay measured through this time. You may even find that people, old bosses, old professional ties, wind up resurfacing, or some old professional patterns or frustrations or things like that also wind up resurfacing. So again, it's likely to be a and or situation. It may be both, where you're having to speak to an old boss. Maybe there's even an offer that's coming in from a client you used to work with, or a company, etc. But again, in that case, I would just try to take your time before making any sort of big decisions there. But yeah, I think that is a lot of what I have for you, Gemini. So just try and take your time here. Try not to make any sort of rash decisions, and you should get a lot of clarity on what you're able to accomplish and what you're wanting to accomplish and how to go about that by the end of March. But in the interim, yeah, things are going to be a little bit up in the air. So in addition to all of that, there's going to be a little bit of a work-life balance question that winds up coming in to around the 3rd, with the eclipse in Virgo that's going to be ruled by that Mercury retrograde in your 10th as well. I just covered that in the most recent video if you want to dig into that a little bit more. But other than that, I do hope that this retrograde treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Cancer, we have the Mercury retrograde in Pisces taking place in your 9th house, and this is the place of your higher mind. This is where you expand your horizons, where you broaden your experience of life. But this is also a place of your worldview, your beliefs, higher education, and travel, quite literally. So when it does come to higher education, courses, learning, or travel on a very literal level, or dealing with foreign contacts, anything like that, confusion, delays, misunderstandings, miscommunications, feeling like things have kind of withdrawn a little bit, expect those kinds of things to come up. If you have any trips planned, definitely, I would expect a hurry up and wait kind of a situation where you're trying to plan extra time for yourself, but then there may even still be a delay. I wouldn't not plan extra time. I definitely would expect, for instance, like a delay with a cab if you're trying to get to an airport, plus maybe a delay with the flight. So it's kind of extra annoying, but you still want to plan for issues like that. But it may come in multiple different aspects of any sort of travel plans that you have. There may even be some confusion as well. So as far as that goes, making sure you're reading everything as thoroughly as you can a few times over. Check the fine print. Make sure if you need extra bags, you're trying to book that, ahead of time. Hotels, etc. Anything to do with, especially like far distance travel. You kind of can't be too over prepared for that. Also, when it comes to any information along those lines, so if you're going overseas, make sure that it is that you have the visa, or that it is a visa-free situation where you can just land and be fine. Make sure you have all your insurance stuff sorted, all of that. Make sure your documents are in order, because it's so likely that they wouldn't be if you don't try your best to stay on top of that with this energy. So across the board, that's something to really keep in mind. With higher education, you may find that you're having a lot of brain fog, that you're having trouble thinking. You may wind up having a miscommunication with a teacher, a mentor, a student. But fortunately, this is pretty flexible. So I think that a lot of people are going to be pretty understanding about all of this. I would just try and make sure that you are communicating as clearly as you can, that if you're confused about anything, that you are asking for clarification. Try to put things in writing as well, so that you can come back to it and you're not just relying on memory. Now, finally, when it comes to aspects of like expanding your horizons, there may be these like plans that you have, or things that you're going to try and do to, again, expand your breadth of experience. So something off the beaten path, something outside of a comfort zone that you've been thinking about or planning, you may be rethinking during this period of time. This could even be bringing you back to something that you used to do that maybe you kind of fell out of, but was a really abiding, fascinating kind of an interest for you. Maybe it's even a genre of books or media or something like this. Maybe it's even writing and publishing. But beyond all of that, when it comes to your beliefs as well, fundamentally, this is going to have you looking at those from different angles. Now, I know that Saturn and Neptune just came out of this house for you, so you probably have been deeply rethinking, questioning, scrutinizing your own belief system, your own philosophy over the past few years with Saturn and Neptune. Now they're in your 10th, but they just came out of your 9th house. But this is going to give you, if there are any lingering questions or anything left up in the air, especially if there are any disappointments that have been left kind of just open as Saturn and Neptune have moved on, that should not have been the case. They should have given you a little bit of hope or something new to look into. If they haven't, this big stellium here plus this Mercury retrograde, it should be putting you in contact with that which is better aligned for you to believe in or to connect with. A new kind of philosophy or a new notion of truth for yourself to connect with. A new worldview so that you don't feel bereft. So I would be keeping your eyes open for that. You may want to dig into or even to revisit some philosophy or some spiritual practices or beliefs or traditions. But with that said, I would just give yourself time during this March and don't feel the need to jump into anything or to commit to a belief. This is going to help to have things percolate. It's going to help to connect you with things to believe in. It's going to help you to feel stimulated to believe and to find truth, to seek out your truth. But that retrograde is going to have you look at things from a lot of different angles before it's done. So I would really give it until April before you start really running with a new worldview or a new belief system or something like this. But yeah, with that said, this is also going to be playing into the eclipse in your 3rd house, this lunar eclipse in Virgo That's going to be ruled by this Mercury retrograde up in your 9th house. And I just covered that in the most recent video. So if you want to go into this a little bit more, there is more information in that video too. And other than that, I think that's pretty much what I have for you, Cancer. So I do hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Leo, we have the Mercury retrograde taking place in Pisces in your 8th house. So this is the house of, quote, other people's resources. So when it comes to any sort of financial agreements or contracts, commitments that you have with other people, debts that you have, that definitely plays in here. So that literal kind of you and other people's resources intermingling aspect. But this can also be a place of like karmic debts or other people's emotional and psychological states that you're connecting to, dependencies and things like this. So it's in this general area that you're likely to feel somewhat misaligned or like there is a miscommunication or a misunderstanding with others, either on financial considerations or dependencies. You may be rethinking how you allow for yourself or other people to be dependent, on each other. You may be reevaluating who you want to be dependent on. You may even be rethinking alone. If you've been considering taking one out, it would certainly be better to push that off until after this whole Mercury retrograde plays out. That way there's not surprises that wind up coming up later or having you commit to something and then wind up rethinking it quite quickly. You can wind up with some buyer's remorse with Mercury retrograde in the 8th house. This can also be, like I said, other people's emotional or psychological states, the complications of other people. So there can be some secrets or some things that were outside of your view, whether intentional or not on the part of other people, that somehow comes to light or that you wind up realizing throughout this period. This could even be debts that you forgot on your part or that you're learning about that someone else is carrying. You may even begin to look at the karmic balance of your relationships. So overall, just really revisiting, rethinking where you are sharing with other people. If you feel like you are oversharing, if you feel like you are doing a lot of emotional labor for other people, a lot of sorting things out. That may be something you naturally do with Pisces up in the 8th house. Trying to look at the balance of that, trying to look at how that is leaving you feeling and avoiding those big, especially joint investments, but really any big purchases, big investments, contracts, especially financially, oriented contracts. Just putting that off until like April, I think is going to be quite a bit better. And finally, just understanding that when it comes to the state of other people, what they're working with, their resources, their value to you and vice versa. I hate to put it in those terms, but that is kind of what these houses speak to. There's likely to be confusion there. So this can wind up clouding your judgment if there is a strong emotional tie. Think about those bonds as potentially somewhat karmic. Maybe think about clearing some of that out. Maybe think about looking at those intense connections that you have with people from different angles, especially again before making any greater commitments with people. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Leo. It's a pretty interesting one. It does look rather emotionally laden, but like something that is going to leave you with a lot more clarity on the other side of it. So it should ultimately be pretty helpful. So I hope that it treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Virgo, we have the Mercury retrograde in Pisces taking place in your 7th house of one-on-one relationships, partnerships, romantic connections, people who are close to you, and how you relate to other people. So for better or worse, that does pretty straightforwardly indicate miscommunications and misunderstandings with other people. So try, if you can, to clarify anything that you know that you're unclear on. Don't be shy to ask questions, but still, no matter what you do, expect to wind up on different pages with other people and try and be pretty patient with other people, especially if people are making like ditzy mistakes about things they should have known, but they didn't. And so there was some misunderstanding. You may even find yourself in that role at certain points of this. You may find yourself needing to converse over a specific topic again and again and again to make sure that you stay on the same page. You may make a plan with someone and then need to reschedule it and then need to reschedule it again. It may be a little bit maddening. You may even find that people are kind of ghosting or they appear to be. They appear to be withdrawing. They appear to be a lot more communicatively introverted than usual. And there may be a tendency to take that somewhat personally, but I would really recommend try not to, because it's much, much more likely that they are just very introverted during this period of time, that they are kind of across the board withdrawing, or that they are themselves a little bit confused. They may be, forgetting to respond to certain things, etc. Much more so than that suddenly there's some big issue coming up. I would say a little later in March, around the third week of March, I would watch out a bit for arguments specifically that may come up. There may be some frustration with partners or other people around that point. But other than that week, I wouldn't take it super seriously if people are pulling back a bit. That would be normal. You may also find that old partners seem to be like popping up again. They may be reaching out. They may be either just connecting, saying hi, seeing where you're at. They may be visiting. They may be trying to rekindle things. This could be a business partner as well that you no longer work with that's reaching out. It could be also a lot of curiosity on your part about how people are doing from your past. And you may be tempted to look around, poke around on social media or something, or reach out to them. There's no real reason here that should be a problem to see where people are at. If, for instance, you had a falling out and someone's reaching out about that, that looks overall pretty fine to me. Although, again, in the third week of March, there may be a little bit of argumentativeness or things like that coming up. Now, additionally, you may just be rethinking, reassessing, reevaluating your partnerships, your commitments, any agreements that you've made, the people that you connect with. Do you really like them? Do you feel like they are on your side? Do they make you happy? Do they cross your boundaries? Are they respectful, etc.? You're likely to be looking at all of that a lot more, thinking about that a lot more. You may be getting a lot of helpful clues, like intuitive hits, or just picking up on little subtle things that people are doing that you usually tend to overlook. So I would be just paying attention, observing. You may even find yourself withdrawing a little bit when it comes to communicating with people, or feeling a little more easily overwhelmed by correspondences or texts or things like that as well. So patience is just going to be really huge with this. Again, there should be a lot of understanding of confusion or miscommunications or things like that, except for that third week of March, when I think we are getting a bit impatient with ourselves and others. So during that time, it's going to be extra important to actively try to be patient with people, to not jump to conclusions, to let the retrograde process play out. And additionally, this is going to be an extra significant Mercury retrograde for you, because it will also be ruling, Mercury rules Virgo, the lunar eclipse that is taking place in Virgo on the 3rd of March too, and that's going to be in your first house. So this is, again, very personal for you, big time reassessing how you are relating to people, who you're connecting with, and do they build you up? Do they feel right? Do you feel like you belong with them? Do you feel like you're still aligned with them, like you have the same goals, etc.? I think those questions are going to loom pretty large, but I did also just cover in the most recent video that eclipse as well. So feel free to check that out if you want to dig into that a little bit more. But other than that, I think that's pretty much what I have for you, Virgo. So I do hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Libra, we have the Mercury retrograde in Pisces taking place in your 6th house, which is not the greatest news that I'm about to break to you. It's probably going to be a somewhat frustrating couple of weeks here because the sixth house has to do with our daily life, our routines. This is where we push to like get things done. This is our working life. This is our errands. A lot of documents and things like that also show up here. Our responsibilities and obligations. We tend to really want to be clear in this area of our life. And this is precisely where things are going to be quite unclear for a few weeks here. So it's not the greatest news. It could perhaps be worse. At least it's not in your third house, right? But we'll look at this from also the health routine aspect of the sixth house, and then we'll get into how this is likely to be impacting your work. So when it comes to your health, that's also probably going to face some delays or setbacks or needing to rethink things, or like there could be, for instance, a supplement that you're taking that you're needing to reevaluate because maybe, for instance, you just looked at some cross indications with another medication you're taking or something, and it could be an issue, or maybe you started taking something around the time that you started having a specific issue and you're needing to like experiment and try things a little bit differently to try to get to the root of something that seems somewhat unclear. It's like, it's probably not going to, on the face of it, be totally black and white. This is what's causing an issue. It's more likely to present in that way of, I'm not sure, but maybe this. And so let me do this differently, or let me look at this or process this or think about this a little bit differently. If you have a regular exercise routine, you may find that that is, for some reason, a little bit less clear. Maybe you're seeing delayed results. This could be that literally getting to the gym winds up being more disrupted. But ultimately, if you have needed to look at your health patterns and so on, this would be a good time to just think about that a little bit differently. Again, maybe to experiment a bit. But I will say that if you get a diagnosis, if you're seeing a doctor or something, this can also show up as a doctor that may or may not have full clarity on something. So if you are seeking clarity and you can go with an appointment maybe in April or something, that might avoid a little bit of confusion or miscommunication with health professionals as well. But that whole aspect aside, this is just going to cause some confusion about what your tasks are, how to complete them. You may run into some tech issues, some documents issues, some confusion around responsibilities where maybe things are getting delegated in ways that they shouldn't be. Maybe there is literally someone, a coworker, that is causing an issue with the work that's being done. Like they might not know what they're doing and therefore be like entering data wrong. And it's a confusing, annoying thing to try and figure out where is this error coming from. Those little miscommunications that wind up playing out in daily life and especially in your working life with colleagues and coworkers, on any teams that you're in, even with family when it comes to, again, errands, chores, things like this. So you're going to want to recheck that. You're going to want to try your best to make sure that you have a system of following up with emails or correspondences. You may find that a lot of people are expecting for you to be responsible for their stuff. This is a lot of energy to be carrying in your sixth house, where you may just be kind of like evoking through no fault of your own this sense in other people of, oh, they'll take care of it. They'll sort it out, right? And just dealing with people who are a little bit more confused, again, on teams and so forth. So double checking all of the mundane details of life. And anything that you can push off a bit probably is going to be the way to go, because there's likely also to be a lot of mental workload that needs to be redone through some part of this process, probably later in March, when you get clarity on how it was actually supposed to be done, right? So mistakes are super easy to overlook. Slowing down with your work is also something this is definitely calling for. And you may get a bit of a boost in your speed or your clarity as this Mercury kind of pushes up against and then crosses Mars, where you get really impatient. And fortunately, that's at the end of the retrograde process where we should be able to get a bit of a speed boost. But you may actually feel pretty comfortable going at a slower pace here, and then toward the end, feel a big push or a big wind at your back. It may be still worth giving that a little bit of time before you go full force, though. And then finally, when it comes to any sort of issues with colleagues, try to avoid any conflicts. Try to be supportive, try to be patient, even if there is someone that's doing something stupid and they're like messing up the data or whatever. Sometimes people just accidentally make stupid mistakes, and you're likely to see quite a bit of that with colleagues during this time. So the more supportive, the more understanding that you can be about that, I think the better throughout this period of time. Again, especially as we get a little bit deeper into this retrograde process and we start to lose patience with the Mars conjunction, mid to late March. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Libra. I know it's not the most fun, but you should be able to get it all sorted out at least by the end of it. Also, this is playing into an interesting eclipse that's going to be very relevant in this process as well. I'm showing that here. I just did a video about that, the previous video that I did, if you want to look more into that angle on all of this. But yeah, other than that, I do hope that this retrograde treats you well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Scorpio, we have the Mercury retrograde in Pisces taking place in your 5th house. And this is the house of your children, if you have children. This is also a place of joy and pleasure and creativity. The people that you love, the activities that you love, all that. So when it comes to your loved ones and children, those are the people that you're most likely to miscommunicate with, misunderstand during this time. So you may want to over-communicate. I know that your own children are usually the most annoying about over-communicating with them. You know, there can be a lot of impatience on the other side there. But I would try and clarify things quite a bit, especially if there's anything to do with plans that you have, if you need to pick them up at a certain time or whatever it is. Try to make sure that they are clear on things, because literally they may be misunderstanding something to do with their own plans. And rather than like it being a miscommunication between you and them, they may just be misunderstanding and communicating that misunderstanding to you. I wouldn't be too shy. Be patient, certainly, but I wouldn't be too shy to double check yourself about their own itineraries and things like that. You may also just find yourself, again, miscommunicating. There is a little bit of a thing in like the 3rd week of March that Mercury retrograde is going to start to get quite impatient. So it's going to start to back up to the North Node and Mars, and all of those are going to be quite close together. So that is a period of time which is more likely to turn into an argument or something like that, or feeling really quite impatient. So when it comes to loved ones, which can be friends, it can be romantic partners, you know, it can be your children, anyone that is a relationship just for the sake of your enjoyment of them, that's when you're more likely to get into an argument. So other than that, this should actually be relatively patient of a Mercury retrograde, but we do have that conjunction with Mars to look forward to in some way or another. You may also find that there's some communication out of the blue, some extra communication, some extra planning that you're needing to do either with your children or with old friends or with your friends. You may even wind up running across some nostalgic feelings about activities that you used to be really into, or past fun or past hobbies that you may think that you want to get back into during this period of time. So that may be coming back to mind. And I would say there's no reason not to pursue something that you used to love if it is coming up as something that you're getting interested in again. Or if an old friend winds up reaching out, the indications here are more positive than not. I would still trust your intuition more so than logic, though. So trust your gut on that. Now, additionally, this can have you revisiting or reviewing or rethinking, reassessing, reevaluating any projects that you're involved in. So be it creative projects that are somehow career related or not, just pleasure projects as well. Or again, the things that you do for pleasure, this could have you looking at that a little bit deeper. So for instance, I mean, quite literally, you could be looking at like, is my drinking that I do for fun, is that maybe like too often? Should I maybe like doing that on a different kind of a schedule? It could be, though, I would kind of expect this maybe even more so. Am I letting myself have enough fun? Am I creating enough space in my life to just kind of relax and let loose and just be and not have to focus on social expectations or professional expectations or whatever it is? This could be having you come back to a mindset of, you know what, fun is a priority. Life is meant to be enjoyed. So I need to come back to that kind of a thing. And that could then be pulling you back into a project that maybe you have set aside for way too long because you got too busy with goals or work or taking care of people or whatever it is, responsibilities, right? But yeah, what else is interesting about this? I do think there may be something as well about like inhibitions and trying to, again, not worry about social expectations when it comes to what you love, but rather being able to hold space for what you love, especially the aspects of yourself that you love and the aspects of your life that you really enjoy that bring you genuine sense of pleasure and playfulness and maybe even like childlikeness, and not worrying about justifying that to other people. And part of the reason for that is that also during this retrograde, we're going to get a lunar eclipse in Virgo up in your 11th house of social expectations, colleagues, friendships, the more like public facing, for the sake of career and benefit kinds of social connections that you have, groups that you belong to, that you identify with, etc. Some peer pressure can totally come from the 11th house. Like, is the way that I'm behaving in accordance with the social status that I am seeking kinds of questions coming down, right? But there's a lunar eclipse that's taking place there on the south node. So I did just cover this much more extensively, but I will just throw out there, that does indicate there's a bit of like a relaxation or a letting something go or a culmination point where you're kind of backing up off of the peak of that 11th house there and coming back to rethinking and reprioritizing this 5th house of just loving life, just being, you know. So I think there's probably going to be some theme there again about peer pressure, your goals, your dreams, your aspirations, and how in alignment with your pleasures those things are during this period of time as well. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Scorpio. So I do hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Sagittarius, we have the Mercury retrograde in Pisces taking place in your 4th house. This is a place of your home, your family, your emotional roots, your past. So there's likely to be some miscommunication in your family, in your home life. So anyone that you live with, any communications or documents around your home, evaluations, like property values, things like this, leases, landlords, parents, children, partners, etc. There's likely to be confusion or miscommunication in those areas, specifically about the home or just with those people and in those dynamics. So there could be a lot of communication within your family that is going back and forth a lot, basically about different people's plans or their states or what's going on with them. And by going back and forth, I mean like changing direction. So, oh, this is an issue that I'm dealing with. Can you XYZ? And then it turns out, no, it's actually not something I'm going to have to deal with. And then, you know, maybe it turns in some other direction. So that's where a lot of that confusion is that it just, there's this kind of shifting of the state of things and almost chasing a sense of clarity around what's going on and how to respond to it. So if you can slow down when it comes to making decisions or family members making big decisions in their lives as well, if there are any decisions that are coming up about property or home considerations, if you can slow that down and maybe push that off until like April, that should help quite a bit. But yeah, I would expect a lot of very dynamic back and forth kinds of communications with your family as well. You may even find that if you were to try to forge ahead with any home or real estate or property considerations, any big family decisions, that those wind up getting delayed externally anyway. Now, this isn't to deny you that thing unless you should be changing your mind about it. Like a delay could even wind up offering you an opportunity to make a pivot that you decide later that you're wanting to make. So sometimes that can be a real blessing in disguise, but sometimes it's also, if it is something that you want to see through, like I said, it's not a denial. It's more of a just kind of kicking the can down the road and creating delays. So I wouldn't fret too much, and I would really look toward April for a sense of resolution along those lines. You may even have some conversations or issues come up from the past, especially the deep past, like your family, even ancestry. This could be stuff you didn't know about your grandparents that winds up coming up or surfacing. There could be old arguments, old grudges that wind up coming up and needing to be discussed, needing to be addressed and looked at differently. Hopefully this isn't a complicated decision that you or a family member has made that winds up needing to be dealt with now because maybe it wasn't dealt with in the past. But that could also wind up being the case. Hopefully, though, if there have been any like regrettable decisions made that really stand out on your part, or again, very close family, this may even wind up offering you an opportunity to change that or to address that in a meaningful way. So, for instance, things that were said that were wrong, or decisions that were made, getting tickets, getting in trouble, losing a position, whatever it is, there may be an ability to kind of ameliorate or correct that issue throughout the process of this Mercury retrograde as well. But ultimately, this is also a place of your emotional core. So a lot of deep reflection and thinking about what's important to you, what makes you feel comfortable, what makes you feel sated and secure. Hopefully this can bring you some clarity on that as well. But at the very least, it'll certainly bring up notions of your conditioning and why it is that you have the thought patterns and the behavioral patterns that you have that you've derived from your early family life. So Mercury's great at figuring out those patterns and seeing them. In Pisces and retrograde, they're going to be coming in a very interesting, different kind of unique way, maybe even serendipitously, where you see some pattern playing out with someone else and it even brings it to mind and brings it to your awareness. Oh, that's why I do that, is because maybe this was the role that I had in my family, or this is something that my parents said to me even just once, at some point, and therefore able to look at that differently and hopefully uproot some of that through this process too. But yeah, other than that, this is a lot to have in your fourth house. So you've got to load it up, lots of transits to your fourth throughout this Mercury retrograde. And that does encourage spending time at home in quietude, on your own, in privacy, and just decompressing. So if you can get extra rest, this is additionally one of the houses that is associated with sleep. So if you can try to catch up on sleep, you can withdraw a bit, not maybe push as hard in career matters and public image matters. You are going to have this eclipse that's coming up that I just spoke to in the most recent video. This is going to be on the 3rd, and this is a lunar eclipse that's going to be ruled by that Mercury retrograde. So it's going to wind up playing into this all very, very significantly, bringing in a bit of like questioning about that home life balance that I was kind of getting at on the maybe re-emphasize the home aspect of that side of the equation. So yeah, I wouldn't downplay the importance of you time, right? But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Sagittarius. So I do hope that this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Capricorn, we have the Mercury retrograde in Pisces taking place in your 3rd house. And I hate to say it, but this is the place primarily of your conscious mind, of your communication. of your correspondences, of your technologies, of your commutes and your connections and so on. So there is a lot of overlap of the themes and the duties of Mercury and third house topics, which does mean that this is more likely to play out as a stronger than usual kind of standard issue Mercury retrograde for you. It's going to be hitting all of those usual places: brain fog, not being able to think clearly, feeling like your thought process is slower, feeling like your ability to make plans is frustrated in different ways, either again through not being able to figure out what should my plans be, or feeling like you keep running into delays, or the people that are on the other side of that, they're not able to answer in time and you're not able to answer in time, etc. So yeah, any sort of time management, making plans, thinking things through, scheduling, all of that is likely to be a bit more annoying during this period of time. So, if you can plan events for a little bit later, if you can be extra patient with yourself and others, especially when it comes to communications, miscommunications, things like that, brain misfiring, etc. The more patient you can be with that, the better. Because the more you try and resist it, the more frustrated I think that you'll wind up getting there. Now, also, when it comes to all the technological aspects of it, your commute, you may find that there is some stupid construction now on your commute or something that causes it to take longer. Or there could just be weirdness that happens periodically more than usual when you're trying to get places, short distance travel around your community. When it comes to emails, texts, literally even the technological devices, you could wind up having more issues with than in a usual Mercury retrograde. So hopefully you don't have some device crap out on you, but if that is the case, one little weird trick with Mercury retrograde and retrogrades in general is sometimes, weirdly enough, the issue seems to sort itself out by the time that Mercury is direct again. So that may be something that you can, if you want to delay like replacing something and you're able to delay that, you might want to delay an actual purchase. I mean, that is also a standard read of you probably shouldn't be making decisions about buying tech devices or communications devices during the Mercury retrograde in your third house anyway. So you may want to try and put that off. And you may actually find that miraculously, oh, now it's working again. Maybe there's a software update or whatever. You may want to be saving things quite a bit more, printing things off more, backing up your data a bit more during this period of time. You may also find like weird crossed wires where it looks like you've sent something, but you haven't actually. So rechecking your emails, rechecking your outbox, rechecking your inbox. Also, if you need to sign or agree to any sort of documentation, checking that very thoroughly as well, checking rules, any sort of procedural stuff. That's all likely to get a little bit more wonky and a little off kilter during this time. So worth keeping a good eye on that. Now, also, the third house, it does have to do with like commutes around your area, but it is also transit, generally speaking. So even if you are going on a long trip, really try to read all the fine print, make sure that you've got your airport codes correct, make sure that you're double checking your hotel bookings, etc. As much of that you can really double check as you can, that would be great. Especially because I just did a video about the lunar eclipse that's going to be in Virgo on the 3rd of March as well, which is going to be ruled by this Mercury retrograde in your third house. So for you, double extra trips and travel are likely to get weird. So you can check out that video as well. That's a big part of what I would have discussed there, although there's some more to it. But yeah, even on long trips, even if you're going overseas or something, you're going on vacation, whatever it is, expect weirdness and try to plan around that. Make sure if you're going overseas that you don't need extra insurance or something, all that weirdness. So additionally, this is a place of studies. So you may find that you're coming back to a topic that used to mentally stimulate you, that you used to be really into. You may be pursuing a course of study on that. This wouldn't be the best time necessarily to sign up for something like that. If you can't avoid it, you can't avoid it. That's cool. Just try and make sure that, you're double checking everything. You may also find that when you are studying that it is harder for you to focus. Try to be patient with yourself with that big time mental fog. Try to clarify things if you have any questions for teachers or students even, or for siblings or neighbors. Try to make sure that you are over communicating rather than not asking for clarification where you need it. And also, again, being just very patient along all of those lines. You may also find that there's some weird thing with old documents coming up. Maybe you need to do some spring cleaning or something, and you wind up stuck on a box that's full of old documents, and you wind up going through all of it, or old photographs or whatever it is. You may get a little bit nostalgic as well with that. But someone as well may wind up coming out of the blue and communicating with you. This could be pretty much because this is a house of communications, it could kind of be anyone. But I would expect friends, neighbors, old schoolmates, etc., more so than any other category. Also, if you are not in regular communication with a sibling, I wouldn't be surprised to see that coming through as well. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Capricorn. So I do hope that this retrograde treats you as well as possible. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Aquarius, we have the Mercury retrograde taking place in your second house. And this is the house of your personal resources. So this is where most often we see money and income and budgets and possessions and things like this show up. But there is also this quality to this house of your personal resources as that which you bring to the table. So your skills, your natural inclinations, your attitudes, etc. What's important to you, what you value as well. So there's going to be a big rethink, a big reevaluation along all of these lines. Perhaps reevaluation is the best way to look at a Mercury retrograde in the second house. So this is very likely to have you rethinking, reviewing your money, your resources, possessions. I know this is tax season. It kind of fits the bill. But you may have some interesting insights that you wind up gleaning this year from going through any sort of accounting. You may notice that your budgets are a little bit off. You may notice where there is some leakage, like, if you're looking for deductions or whatever, you may in your bank statements find, I didn't realize that I didn't cancel that subscription, etc. This could be about property that you own, evaluations of that property. You may even be considering selling some possessions or some property during this time. I might recommend giving it some time, letting that play out a bit, thinking that through. We could have you making a sale or a big purchase during this period of time that you wind up rethinking or regretting a little bit later. So I would push until about April, any sort of big purchases or big sales. There may even be some delays in income coming through. And again, this could even be a return or something like this. Again, that would be way too on the nose for a Mercury retrograde. We usually use those words, but maybe there's a delay in literally your tax return. So I wouldn't be betting on short time frames. There's likely to be a little confusion. There's likely to be some potential even documents issues where maybe something wasn't signed that should have been, whatever, like confusion, miscommunications, delayed time frames when it comes to money. So if that is the case, really the only thing that we can do about that, as long as we're clear on what's going on, is to just try and be as patient as possible. A Mercury retrograde doesn't deny something coming in, it just delays it. This can also then have you rethinking your spending habits. So what's interesting about this retrograde, this Mercury retrograde, as I mentioned in the collective reading, is that it starts out with a conjunction to Venus, which is very optimistic. And then it passes through these trines to Jupiter. That's also pretty optimistic. But it ends up conjoining Mars and the North Node. And I feel like there's just this extra bit of information that might be less optimistic than what we've been working with through a lot of it. So I would just try really hard for all of us, for you particularly when it comes to finances, just not to get over optimistic or to not overspend in the beginning, because there may just be like a something maybe even that you're forgetting that's going to be coming up, or like an auto pay that's annual or something. I would just hate to see that be a bit of a rude awakening toward the end of the Mercury retrograde. So the more that you can stay steady and not overspend in the beginning of it, the more likely you are to just have decent news throughout the whole process here. There could even be like a reevaluation of some financial patterns, spending habits, old financial issues that may be even resurfacing like from old habits. Hopefully, again, this isn't some bill or something that you have forgotten, but that could definitely be the case. There may be a little something that winds up popping up on your credit report where you're like, oh man, I completely forgot about that. Let me go ahead and pay that off. And that could be that, getting back to the Mercury, the conjunction to Mars end of this whole process here, which again, that's going to be a bit later in March. But yeah, ultimately, this is also about reevaluating what's important to you. So even when we're looking at our spending, what really increases your quality of life and what's just kind of extra? What do you not really need? What do you just kind of feel like you should be spending on, but you don't really get a lot of use out of it? Again, I know we're in this kind of subscription culture now where there's a lot of things that fit that month to month, but you may even just be looking at, do I want to be working this many hours? Do I even want to be working in this environment anymore? Maybe it pays well, but maybe it's just not very satisfying. The trine that Mercury is making to Jupiter in retrograde as well, those big rethinks about, do you like the process that is required for you to earn your income? You should get very helpful information along those lines by just kind of turning that over in your head and rethinking that quite a bit. So if that's something that maybe you've been kind of keeping at arm's length because it's a complicated process and can raise some uncomfortable questions, it is safe for you, at least internally during this period of time, and ultimately beneficial for you to be thinking about those things at least. And that doesn't mean you need to rush to make decisions or anything, but it can give you a lot of clarity. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Aquarius. I'm showing here the lunar eclipse as well that's going to wind up playing into this. I just covered that in the last video. If you want to look at that as well, that's going to happen on March 3rd. And other than that, I do hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Pisces, the Mercury retrograde in Pisces is taking place in your first house of yourself, your identity, your personality. So you're likely to have some confusion when it comes to how to assert yourself or how to project who you are, possibly even with regard to who you are generally, a little bit of confusion around your self-image, around your identity. There may be an extra softening there, which is already somewhat inherent to Pisces, the like reflectiveness of other people, as well as the receptivity of, what other people project, etc. You may be looking at that a little bit deeper about where you end and others begin, about who you are independent of other people. And there may be something to this that's a little bit deeper, where Saturn and Neptune were just in your first house for the past couple of years together. And they've been challenging notions of who you are, challenging your assumptions about your roles and what you're capable of and what you're not capable of, etc., and building out a new plan for yourself going forward, building out new personal goals for yourself. And this Mercury retrograde is coming through, and it's just asking some more surface level questions along all of those lines of, like, what do the edges of this look like? What are the aspects of this that we can kind of clear up, or that we can action, or that we can kind of organize or sort out. Now, it's trying to do that in Pisces, which I'm sure you know is not the most organized of signs. It's not the best at figuring out how things are going to wind up working out. So you'll probably need to intuit your way through some of this. You'll also probably find that there are some connections or communications, realizations that come in serendipitously or through your intuition that help to clarify your personal goals, that help to clarify your plans going forward. But you may also find that when it comes to those plans that you're not quite able to get them off the ground quite yet either. So try to take this time, try to take March to reflect more, to do a little extra reflection on those personal goals, on the decisions, on the plans that you have out in front of you, so that you can utilize the fact that you should be very clear about all of this by April, But in the meantime, there's just going to be, it's going to feel like, yeah, I'm going to go this way and I'm going to do this. And then you change your mind again. And then you change your mind a third time. And so there's going to be some aspects of your plans going forward that will shift and change in this time frame. And so there's nothing wrong with trying to assert in a specific direction, but just keep in mind, you may need to redo it. You'll probably need to redo that. So you may feel like you're spinning your wheels a little bit. Like I said, when it comes to self-expression as well, how to assert yourself, how you should be, what people are projecting on you, how much it is your duty to accommodate others versus vice versa, right? Confusion, a little bit of weirdness with boundaries as well along all of those lines. You may feel like a little extra misunderstood. You may even feel like you don't fully know where you're coming from when you're expressing yourself during this period of time. You may also feel like all of the usual Mercury retrograde stuff, the stumbling over words, the brain fog, all of that, the tech issues, the delays, etc. You may feel like they affect you a bit more this time around than usual during a Mercury retrograde. So just try to slow down, avoid any sort of impulsive moves, because like I said, you'll probably need to redo that anyway. And definitely tap into your sense of intuition. Follow that more so than logic, because like I said, the compartmentalization, the organizational skills of Pisces, it's not so great when it's dealing with discrete data. What it's better at doing is taking on and getting information through osmosis, through intuition, through observation, and just letting the pieces kind of fall in place and almost letting a lot of the information sort itself out and do what it's going to do from a passive place. Watch that play out, think it through, and then make your decisions once Mercury has moved on. And so again, that's going to be around April time. Now, all of this is going to play into the lunar eclipse that we have on the 3rd of March as well. This lunar eclipse in Virgo is going to be ruled by this Mercury retrograde, since Mercury rules Virgo. So I just covered that in the most recent video. If you're wanting to look into that a little bit more, that's going to have a bit more to do with your connections and projection and boundaries and things like that. So if you want to look more at that, feel free to check that out. But other than that, I think that's pretty much what I have for you. So I do hope that this retrograde treats you super well. Thank you so much for spending this time with me.